this week I've got Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is the latest film from Quentin Tarantino. And I'm going to fully admit that I am not a huge Tarantino fan. Like, I know that he has some very rabid fans out there, but I acknowledge that he has a style. There are certain of his films that I've enjoyed, but I'm not like, oh boy, a new Tarantino movie is coming out. So with this one in particular, I wasn't super excited to see it, so I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't exactly have the highest expectations, and oh boy. All right, so Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is the thing. There's nothing Hollywood loves more than Hollywood. So this film is definitely set up to be like an awards contender. It's set up to appeal to a certain type of person. And I don't think the general audience, aside from Tarantino fans and like old Hollywood fans, are necessarily going to connect with this story. It's ambling, it's long, and I know he's done the whole like tangent storyline, let's cut to somebody else stuff in previous films, and it has worked successfully. In this one, I'm like, I don't think he knows where he's going. I think he just wants to do a bunch of these little things and tried to figure out a story to string them all together. What I took away from this is like, I think he just wants to prove that he can make an old style movie, whatever, just as well as like the old 50s, 60s, 70s, like Hollywood auteurs. And the funny thing is there are scenes in this movie where he basically like comps in Leonardo DiCaprio into actual old footage from old movies starring like, you know, Steve McQueen or whoever. And I feel like he just did it so he could prove he could do it. And I'm like, if you just wanted to make a bunch of old time, like little moment vignette movies, go to Netflix, go to Amazon and just say, hey, Tarantino presents, and then do these little one-off stories. Don't make a 2-hour and 45-minute feature film that the strings that tie these stories together don't make sense or don't matter. It's just... it was so self-indulgent. It's so frustrating. Like, I was just sitting there like, what's the point? What's going to happen? Like, the cast is very impressive. But of course, but that doesn't matter if you don't utilize them well. Like, Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt star in it, and they're fine. They're doing well. I am one of those people who I'm not a huge Leo fan either. I don't see him disappear into roles anymore. He's just very one note. He's Leonardo DiCaprio's, you know, he might like tweak his accent to be a little more Southern, or he might tweak it to be a little more like whatever, but he's just Leonardo DiCaprio. And pretty much same goes for Brad Pitt these days. And so to put the two of them together is just like, okay, I am watching Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt in an old-timey movie, but as themselves, not as their characters. So DiCaprio plays Rick Dalton, who's this kind of like amalgamation of stars of the time. I think he was based on Burt Reynolds, and he's like a TV actor who wants to transition to movies. And then Brad Pitt plays a character called Cliff Booth, who is his stunt double. And they like have this weird kind of like symbiotic relationship. And it follows the two of them. And then there's this huge setup that I know they're teasing in all the trailers and stuff like that, where their next door neighbor is Margot Robbie, who's playing Sharon Tate. Now, here's the other challenge. This is like a slight spoiler, but also not, because it's super integral to the plot. But if you aren't super familiar with what happens to Sharon Tate, then this movie doesn't really matter. Care about the stakes, if that makes sense. So Sharon Tate was married to Roman Polanski. She was an actress and a model, and she met a very untimely end. She was murdered by members of the Manson family, and she was 8.5 months pregnant at the time, and they like smeared the blood on the walls and wrote Helter Skelter. And when I say Manson family, I mean Charles Manson, the crazy cult leader. So that info is super important, but I didn't remember exactly what happened to her. I knew she passed away, but I couldn't remember how or why. And so you need to know that going in for there to be stakes in this movie. And so it happened so long ago that I don't know if people are going to have... If you weren't a Tarantino fan and did your research on this film, or you weren't an old Hollywood fan, or you know what, you may have been alive at the time and remember the news, or you are a fan of what, like cult stories, then you might not immediately remember the kind of consequences and stakes of having Sharon Tate as a character in this film. In fact, the whole Manson storyline in this film is just kind of like wavering in the background, and you visit their crazy ranch at one point, but none of it ever feels like it pays off. And so I'm like, why explore this plot line to start? Is it just because you had Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski and they were big Hollywood names at the time? Also, Roman Polanski, gross. Like, now, I almost want to put him in the same category as Tarantino, as like, oh, people as human beings who super skeeve me out, but technically speaking have made some decent films. Anyway, that piece of information on Sharon Tate I think is important to have going into the film in order to build any sense of suspense with having her character there. But he just assumes that you as an audience member will know that, and I don't think that's necessarily fair. I'm not into people leading films too much, but also like, just saying, hey, this is Sharon Tate is not helpful. Like, I need to know the correlation between Sharon Tate and the Manson family. Anyway, Margot Robbie plays Sharon Tate. Emile Hirsch plays J. Sebring, her friend. There are a bunch of great supporting characters who have like 1 or 2 scenes. Timothy Olyphant, Dakota Fanning, Bruce Dern, Al Pacino, Kurt Russell, Luke Perry has a scene. All good actors. But this movie doesn't flow together in a way that I care about any of them particularly. I'm just watching these like one-off beat scenes. And then the other thing is, look, there's always a discussion about how Tarantino treats women. And even when he has strong female characters, I still take issue with the way he utilizes them. You know, they're like either instruments of death or puppets to be used or whatever. Especially lately, they don't feel like rounded out characters. And there was talk of, oh, well, Margot Robbie doesn't have that many lines in this film. And I'm like, I don't care how many lines she has. You don't need to have lines to be a good actor, and you have screen time and all this stuff. But I do care that you don't do anything in this film. And not through any fault of her own. She does the best with what she has. But she might as well be a prop in terms of the way they use her to advance the story, to do whatever. Like, she's trying so hard, but they do not give her meat to her role. And especially considering who she is playing, it's kind of ridiculous. And so I'm like, why even bother to include this? Like, why? Like, why? I walked away from it just feeling like this is so self-indulgent. There are definitely notes of like previous Tarantino stuff. Like basically the whole third act is a Kill Bill type movie. There's just this one, like, this is kind of a spoiler, but not. There's just this one extended death that involves a female character that I'm just like, this is so gross and torture porn. And like, it went from being cool, all right, you defeated this person, to like, why are you doing that? Oh my God, this is inhumane. If any of this sounds exciting and interesting to you, then by all means, go see this film. But to me, this was Tarantino just being allowed to let loose and do whatever he wants, which there are plenty of like directors who, if you let them do that, things turn out great because they also have their own system of checks and balances. But his ego just clearly gets so in the way of making this into an actually good movie that I could set aside any of the personal stuff, any of the other stuff I feel about the actors. And there are other moments where I've been able to do that with his films even recently. Like, I liked Hateful Eight. So I'm over it. I was not very interested in this. I tried to give it a chance, but it was rough. Also, again, 2 hours, 45 minutes, and I saw it on 35 millimeter, and so they had to change the reels twice. And so it very much took you out of it, but it also just served to very much highlight how disparate the act breaks are and how like weird, and these stories just do not necessarily make sense together, even in his storytelling style of like stories that are kind of cobbled together. So not for me. 2.5 out of 5.